There was a very well realized script, and when I read the book afterwards, I couldn't believe that Curtis Hanson and Brian Elgelin had actually been able to pull a script out. It's so complicated and convoluted and full of perverted and polluted people that, getting a script from it would have been a massive and mammoth task. But they did a very good job. And that is from Screen Slam in 1997. Russell Crowe, in an interview with Screen Slam in 1997 with his film LA Confidential. Hello and welcome to Total 90s Recall. I'm Molly.
And I'm Chloe.
And between my time on set and Chloe's narrative insight as an editor, we're watching 90s films and asking ourselves, were these really as good or bad as we remember or as their reputation implies? And today we're doing LA Confidential from 1997, a seminal film of the 90s, I would say. Chloe, what was your relationship with this film?
I first watched this on VHS as a teenager, sometime after it would have come out, because I was about 11 when it was first in cinemas. And I absolutely loved this film. I watched it again and again. I remember the VHS box. It was actually cardboard. It was just a very kind of beautiful package. And I loved it so much that I wanted my friends to watch it as well. So
yeah.
I embarked on a rather doomed operation in which I tried to play LA Confidential during lunch breaks in the sixth form common room. And we didn't have that much time. So I would sort of put it on for like 20 minutes at a time. And obviously in a sixth form common room, you've got people coming and going here, there and everywhere. And people are not there for every lunch break. And so it was a completely doomed venture from the start because, of course, you've got people sitting there. They haven't got a clue what's going on and they're just asking questions. So I was pausing it every few minutes to be like, no, you see, he's the cop. He's actually a corrupt cop, but he's now decided to do this. And, the reason why Rollo Tomassi is such an important name is, okay, all right, going back to the start. This guy's called Bud.
Okay, and so for American listeners, about how old are you?
Sixth form, you're between about 16 and 18. So it's like the top 2 years of school. So you're doing your A-levels. It's now actually called years 12 and 13.
Yeah.
So we were kind of about the right age to watch it, but obviously not everyone was quite in the right emotional and mental space to watch it and appreciate it. And it is a film that you really do need to sit down and concentrate on.
Yes. So for me, this was the first time I watched the film. I know. And like when we were talking about doing this podcast, this is the type of film I was thinking of when I was thinking about this podcast, when we were talking about this podcast, because this wasn't a film that I was able, like you, to watch at the time. I would have been, so it was 97, so I was 14 when it came out. Definitely wouldn't have been allowed to watch it. But it definitely like seared in my brain because this is the same year as Titanic. We'll get into it, but it was a Best Picture nominated. To your point about the outside of that VHS tape, I imagine that the cover was the poster, which is like Kim Basinger, like taking up half of it. And she's like looking very like, fuck me now eyes. And
she's very sultry.
Very sultry, right? And so I definitely remember that. And I remember this being talked about. And being talked about as like a really good film. And for whatever reason, I just never caught it as an adult. So watching it as for the first time, I'm glad. In some ways, I think I am glad I didn't watch it even as like 18 or 19, because now as an adult, I caught more things. Things like landed differently. And I'll just say it now, like I really enjoyed it overall. For the Oscars that year, Best Picture was Titanic, LA Confidential, Full Monty, Good Will Hunting, and As Good as It Gets. So all future Total 90s Recall.
Yeah, quite a spread in genres there as well.
What a spread. So yeah, so like going back in our time machine, this was released in the US in September 19th, 1997. It had already premiered at Cannes in May. It was released just over a month later in the UK on the 31st of
Mm.
October 1997. It was directed by Curtis Hanson. So before this, he had a big hit, critical darling with The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. After this, he would do 8 Mile, which Kim Basinger also was in Her Shoes, very different movie, and Wonder Boys, written
Mm.
by Brian Helgeland and Curtis Hanson, based on the book by James Ellroy, who did not like the adaptation. Um, I'd be curious to like your insight, Chloe, what insight you have. The author of the book called it, quote, I think it's a turkey of the highest form. I think Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger are impotent. The director died, so now I can disparage the movie.
I think we'll mention it later, but James Ellroy does like to say things for effect.
Mhm.
So sometimes I think you can't quite tell whether or not he fully owns his comments in the press. But I think a lot of authors often have a difficult, strange relationship with the adaptations of their books.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think the best way to say, is it a good adaptation, is more, does it capture the spirit of the
Amen.
book?
Yeah.
I haven't read this book, so I can't comment on that. But I think ultimately, fans of books that get turned into movies need to accept that if something is a massive book, in this case, this is nearly 500 pages long,
Yeah.
how can you possibly distill all of the different plot lines and bring all of the characters into the film? Otherwise, the film would be very, very long.
Yeah.
And I think there's a case to be made. Now we're living in this age of streaming where you get sort of 10-hour adaptations of a book or whatever. Actually, maybe it's quite nice to have an adaptation that is its own thing and is a bit
Yeah.
shorter
Yeah.
and just fillets it down and captures the essence of something. I think it comes down to, is it bastardizing it or is it actually just filleting it? I think the
Yeah.
latter is acceptable.
I completely agree, and I as someone like I love books, and I've also been very disappointed when I've watched a film and then shortly after reading the book, and that's why I don't do that anymore. I'll just wait. But you're completely right. I'm guilty of it. These are two different mediums, and apparently this book talking about LA Confidential now. There was like multiple plots going on, multiple characters, and it sounded very convoluted. I thought that the script that came out of it was really good. Anyway, moving on. So starring now remember this is 1997, folks. We'll get into it. But Kevin Spacey, a 90s leading man. Russell Crowe, his American Hollywood breakout. Apparently, he says, according to him, the studio didn't want him and at one point had stopped paying for his hotel and rental car. And he said apparently they wanted Sean Penn or Robert De Niro. I could see Robert De Niro. I couldn't see Sean Penn. I think Sean Penn could do the good parts where Bud's like beating up on the wife beaters, but I don't think he would bring
Mm.
the softness that actually Russell Crowe did. I don't
Also,
know. I
Robert
don't
De
know.
Niro is quite a bit
He
older.
older. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, Hollywood, he sells movies, right?
Mm.
And then also, of course, Guy Pearce, another American Hollywood breakout. He had already had a breakout in Australia, but this is his Hollywood breakout. Kim Basinger, she won an Oscar for the role. James Cromwell, Danny DeVito, and David Strathairn.
Yeah, on the casting, I mean, it's quite interesting to see, obviously, seeing Kevin Spacey as the first build. On the posters, he's slightly
Yeah.
behind Kim Basinger. He was the bigger star at the time,
Yeah.
and now I think we'd probably say that Russell Crowe is the bigger star. We'll
Yeah.
obviously broach the question, the issue of Kevin Spacey and everything
Yeah.
since later on. I was also interested in the fact that Kim Basinger, in the role of Lynn, she was about 43 when she made this
Mm.
film. Crowe, who she's paired with, was 32. So it's quite rare to see an older
Yeah.
woman paired with a younger man. So it's quite interesting. I think Curtis Hanson just thought she was perfect for the role.
And she
I think
was.
she's very good in it, but I don't think she looks like Veronica Lake as she's meant to.
No. No.
And there's a
Especially
moment
when we see Veronica Lake later.
we see her, and then we see Kim Basinger standing in front of a projection of Veronica Lake, and it's like, no, they don't look similar. They've got the same hair about
Yes.
that, but
Well,
there's a world of difference in their faces.
well, again, I hadn't seen this, right? But I thought, "Oh, is she actually Veronica Lake? Like, is that like a younger her?" I mean, I was like, "It doesn't look like her at all," but maybe it's like maybe she is actually Veronica Lake, and that's just younger versions of her. And then it all like within like moments, it's all revealed that she's meant to look like her and blah blah blah.
Yeah, yeah. And the film that is projecting in the background at that moment is called The Gun for Hire, starring Veronica Lake. So yes, clearly it's meant to evoke this Hollywood
Yeah.
fantasy.
Academy Awards. I don't know if I wanna go through the whole list, but it won Best Supporting Actress, as I already said, and Best Adapted Screenplay. I got multiple nominations, as I said already, for Best Picture, Director of Cinematography, Golden Globes, again, lots of nominations and wins. BAFTAs, Best Editing, it got for and Best Sound for BAFTA.
Mm.
Kevin Spacey was nominated BAFTA for Best Actor, and Kim Basinger Best Actress at BAFTA. Critics' Choice, Cannes. It was a nominee for the film Palme d'Or. But I think this says something about the film. You can say all that, or you could have gotten none of that. But I think what says a lot about this film is it was in 2015. It was preserved in the Library of Congress in the U.S. National Film Registry as a culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant film. And like for those not familiar, that's a huge step for films or anything. They'll do that with books as well. And that means like we think this is so important that we should preserve this for future generations. Chloe, what's the log line for this film?
This is from IMDb.
Yeah.
It is, as corruption grows in 1950s Los Angeles, 3 policemen, one straight-laced, one brutal, and one sleazy, investigate a series of murders with their own brand of justice. That phrase, their own brand of justice, is most definitely doing some heavy lifting there.
Yeah.
Because their brand of justice is less slap a pair of handcuffs on you and read you your rights. I'm not sure whether Miranda rights even a thing in the 1950s. I
Oh,
don't know.
oh, that is a good question. I might try to look that up. But clearly, these police officers don't know what it is.
No, clearly not. Yeah. So, I mean, generally speaking, if they want a confession, they'll punch first and ask questions later.
Yeah.
That's how they kind of get confessions and clues
Whether
from
it's the right
people.
person or not, it's who they think it is. And I think for
Yeah.
me, that's like one of the themes and things that I kept coming back to is this theme of police brutality.
Mm.
This is taking place in the 50s in LA. And 40 years later, we'd have the riots after the Rodney King beating. And LA police officers are notoriously, at the time, maybe still, racist and brutal. And what I thought was interesting about this is they're honest about it. James
Mm.
Cromwell is telling Guy Pearce, like, "Are you willing to do all these terrible things to get the job done?" And he's like, "No, I'm
Mm.
not." We watched A Few Good Men a few episodes back, and in that film, Jack Nicholson's character is essentially saying the ends justify means. This is a bad Marine, and he didn't deserve to be a Marine anymore. Like, it's sad that he's died, but he shouldn't have been a Marine and get him off my base, right?
The overarching discipline on the base matters more than the rights of an individual soldier
Yeah.
is the kind of the argument he's making, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
with this, they're basically saying, so long as we solve the case and we get the bad guys, it doesn't matter if some other bad guys or our suspects get beaten up in the process.
Yeah.
Doesn't even matter if we shoot someone who's innocent of this crime.
Because they were guilty of something else anyway.
Yeah. But do you think, I mean, I'm thinking particularly of the black suspects
Yeah.
because I think they are quite a sort of troubling set of characters. And I'll talk a bit more later about the film's treatment of women and minorities. But in some ways, it sort of slightly gets away with it morally, if you like,
Yeah.
because these guys are bad guys.
Yeah.
We find out later they haven't committed the crime that they were originally arrested for. They didn't commit the Night Owl massacre, but they have partaken in an associate of theirs terrible kidnapping and rape
A gang
of
rape.
a young Mexican woman. And so the film sort of goes, oh, they're innocent of this crime, but now, oh, by the way, they're also absolute monsters and they've done something really terrible. So it's kind of okay that then they get shot.
Yeah.
Is perhaps what the film is suggesting. So I wonder, does the film say that the end does justify the means?
Well, I think that's the question. I think the characters, James Cromwell's character definitely thinks the end justifies the means. Although you could even argue that because he just really wants to be a mob boss. He just really wants to make the
Mm,
money. That's the whole reason he's doing everything. But he's been corrupt for decades, we
mm,
learn. So I think to him, the ends justify the means. Like, oh yeah, maybe they didn't do this, but they were bad guys. That's why we're pinning it on them
mm.
because like I'm pinning it on them. They're bad guys. They need to go away anyway. So let's just use them for means to the end, to our end.
Does the film agree to some degree with the James Cromwell's character's perspective that actually we're dealing with a bunch of criminals, even if we shoot them in this case for the wrong crime, nevertheless they needed to be off the streets, kind of thing. It's about rough justice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is the film to some degree agreeing with this, or is it a bit more stepping away and saying, look at this absolute hellhole where the police are almost as bad as the criminals, that there is no such thing as true justice?
For me, I think so this is a film noir, right?
Mm,
And so in any film noir, you have an anti-hero, you have a complicated protagonist.
mm.
But for me, I think the film is more the latter. For me, the film is more saying like the cops aren't good guys either. Like they're all
Yeah,
bad. Um,
yeah.
and they're just able to get away with it, and get medals for it.
I think that you're probably right that the ending of the film
Yeah.
is making that argument, because we obviously have the fact that there's this kind of cynicism in the final scene where James Cromwell's character is, his involvement in this, the fact that he masterminded this is hushed up. And there's this deal that Exley partakes in to whitewash the LAPD's reputation. And then he kind of says, well, I'm just using them for a while whilst they use me.
Yeah.
But I suppose we're left with the question of whether or not eventually he'll lose all vestiges of his idealism and just morph into another Dudley Smith. So I feel like the film is probably trying to, as you say, argue the case that this is absolutely corrupt and there are no good guys.
Yeah.
It is also a film where everything is resolved through a massive gunfight.
Yeah.
And so and now are we meant to sort of be like, well, at least those bad guys are taken
Yeah.
care of. I
Yeah.
don't know if it does enough to say nothing has necessarily got better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I felt like that last scene, it suddenly went from a film noir to a Western. I'm like,
Yes.
gunfight at OK Corral.
But then that's
Yeah.
quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's basically saying that America has not moved
Yeah.
on in 200 years from its
Yeah.
origins, where it was literally might equals
Yeah.
right.
I don't know. I think the film is actually wanting us to have this exact conversation.
Mm,
What I got from it is like they're all terrible. They're all evil. It's corrupt. And I thought it was more of an interesting thing that actually it's Russell Crowe who, out of everyone, and let's be honest,
uh,
Russell Crowe does not have, he's not a dove here. You know what I mean? But
no.
moralistically, he has the least amount of kills on screen compared to
Yeah.
everyone else. He's honest about who he is and what he is. Whereas Guy Pearce, Ed, he starts out as this like Boy Scout who clearly does want the limelight. He takes off his glasses the first time he gets a photo taken and all this kind of stuff. But he's like, oh no, I would never do those things. Everything you're saying. And then he exactly does that to Dudley, James Cromwell's character in the last
Yeah.
scene, because their first scene together. Would you shoot a suspect in
Yeah.
the back? No, never. And that's exactly what he does. So he has become what he vowed he wouldn't
Mm,
be. And maybe that is what this is trying to say, is that it's full circle and you eventually become what you say you never would.
yeah. I suppose there's a little bit of me that's like, even though it's critiquing it, it slightly revels in
Oh
it.
yeah.
Aren't these guys slightly more heroes than anti-heroes because they're just really cool with their
Yes.
guns? And I feel like you get that a lot in
Yeah.
American cinema, that it's a good guy with a gun is going to take down the bad guy with the gun. And as we know in real life, that actually does not actually
Yeah.
happen. And so there is a bit of a fantasy overlaid over
Yeah.
this to some
But isn't
degree.
that all film? Isn't all film fantasy? And that's just what, this film is providing this fantasy?
I will suggest some recommendations at the end of this where I think that maybe they don't indulge in that fantasy
Okay.
quite so much. But again, yeah, I'm kind of on the fence about how much this film owns its violence, if you
Yeah.
see what I mean.
Well, and to that point, like, you know, is that a very 90s thing, or is that just a very, as you said, American film thing, or is that just a very Hollywood film thing, or is that just a film thing? Is lots of violence in this film. Um, I tried to
Mm.
get the exact body count. I think it's 33 on-screen kills.
There's got to be more than that. There's got to be
I
more
know,
than that.
that's what I
I
said.
feel like just in that last scene,
That's
there's
what I
probably
was like, how many
33.
people are I mean, first of all, how many people are there? Second of all, how many
Yeah.
people are dying here? Moving on from the police brutality, I really enjoyed this film. And what I enjoyed about it was the direction, the filmmaking craft, the story
Mm.
structure. It's interesting, as we've already said, that the source material, there's a lot going on. But I thought very 90s, we talked about this before, is efficient storytelling. That whole montage from Ed getting his medal through Bud finally going into Kim Basinger's place. You get across the point that Ed has now finally been accepted by his fellow policemen. Even even Dudley is like, yeah, that's my boy. He's going up in the ranks. We're learning more about Bud slash Russell Crowe's character. And it's just really efficient storytelling. And I feel like
Mm.
we've lost that since the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you think?
Lots of use of montage as well, which I think is a very nice way of showing time is moving on and look, the
Yeah.
violence has
Yeah.
escalated, and it's often intercut with the headlines. So you're getting a real quick beat, beat, beat sense of here's how the investigation is moving on, and here's how the wider world is responding to it. I also thought there's a nice aspect in the storytelling where it's not going to over explain itself. There's some brilliant moments that just really use that economy of realizations hitting characters to really maximize their impact. So that I think the best sort of moments are when Dudley Smith shoots Jack.
Yeah.
Basically, he finds out, does anyone else know this
Yeah.
intel that implicates Smith? And Jack confirms no. And then he's got his back turned to him. And then he turns around and shoots Jack in the chest. And then Jack responds, this is Kevin Spacey's character, responds by saying his last words, which is Rollo Tomasi.
Yeah.
And we know that
Yes.
Rollo Tomasi is the made up name that Guy Pearce's character Exley came up for the assassin of his father. He never knew who killed his father, but he gave him this name, and he only told Jack that, and that's his reason to go into the police, is to get the bad guys.
Yeah.
And Rollo Tomasi really is emblematic of
Yeah.
that. And so then we have the follow-up scene where Dudley Smith then goes to X's character, having sort of basically gone, right, we're going to get the
Yeah.
bad guy who killed Jack, to all of the other cops. And he says, I just want you to follow up on a lead, Rollo Tomasi. And that moment when
Ooh.
Exley hears that name and realizes that Dudley Smith knows something that he shouldn't know, he knows that this is a code. This is Jack from beyond the grave giving him a message. Don't trust this guy. Just that brilliant moment where Guy Pearce's face freezes.
But
and, and Dudley Smith doesn't know. It's such a great moment.
that is direction and acting right there. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Because Guy takes that in. He doesn't overreact. The way the camera goes, and I would even say cinematography, and the direction of that moment, it's like there's very subtle things that happen with the camera, but like I physically felt that with him.
It's such a great,
It's
powerful
such a
moment.
great, oh my God.
It also reminded me of, and this is just spoiler moment for The Usual Suspects.
Yes.
But another Kevin Spacey movie from the 90s.
Yeah.
it's very reminiscent of the Kaiser
Yes.
Soze reveal
I
in
totally
The
was
Usual
gonna say the same
Suspects.
thing. I felt the same thing.
I have to say that movies can be brilliant for a moment in the script, a single shot. They don't necessarily have to be, oh, that amazing gunfight. I didn't really remember the gunfight from this, but I did remember those two
Yeah.
scenes that I've just described because they are such impactful, emotional moments where you go,
Yes.
oh my God.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a great movie moment.
I was gonna say, like, that was that again, that goes back to the storytelling is I just loved the screenwriting on this. There's just so with each line, there's so much,
Yeah.
um, depth. There's so much more going on.
Yeah. The other thing that elevates this as a film is its theme of imagery.
Yes.
You know, it's about optics. It's about the press and their relationship with the cops, and of course, it's set in Hollywood, so it's all about image. And so, this is a film that's constantly commenting on image and optics. They've got the press on speed dial, these cops. So obviously Exley and Smith at the beginning are really pally with the reporters on Christmas Eve. Like they're just going to write a puff piece
Yeah.
about them and how brave and righteous our LAPD is. Jack's taking bribes from Sid Hudgens, Danny DeVito's character, who is the editor for Hush Hush magazine.
Great name.
Yes, Hush Hush. I think it's called LA Confidential in the original novel. And he takes part in these staged arrests. At one point, he's actually sort of standing in front of a billboard for his TV show that he consults on, whilst the press are kind of taking photos of these
Yeah.
sort of half-naked actors who've been arrested for trumped-up charges.
Yeah.
And, you know, the cops are literally posing for photos outside the Night Owl massacre scene. And the first reaction that the DA and the others have when Exley gives his honest account of all the corruption and venality and violence that Dudley Smith wrought is they're thinking, well, what's the PR implications? They're
Yes.
going, when the press find out, they'll have a field day. And so it's all about image. And what's really fantastic is that the cinematography and the editing and every kind of visual choice supports this theme. So you've got things like even just the fact that gruesome crime scenes are frozen on screen, and then there's like a flashbulb light, and then they become these kind of lurid black and white photos on the front pages of the tabloids. There's all these press photos of Exley and Smith
Yeah.
under these very self-serving headlines. It's always about that. But then there's also, I think it's interesting that it's about images in terms of the framing. So Bud's always watching Lynn in his car
Mm.
window through the rearview mirror. She's often framed by the very beautiful arches of her porch of her Spanish-style house. My favorite shot in the film is when Bud kills that kidnapper rapist.
Mhm.
Behind him, we see the rest of the cops come rushing towards the house through the window frame. It's just a
Yes.
really beautifully framed shot of a very grim scene. And I guess it's, you know, this idea of framing, I don't know if it's meant to be a bit of a visual pun, like there's a lot of people being set up, framed.
Yeah.
But or it's, you know, it's about the fact that we get a little bit of the picture that the cops want you to see. So it's the framing, it's the PR
Yeah.
spin on things. You know, you don't get to see the rest of what's cropped out. And there's a lot about viewpoints, pausing on the cops' faces before they enter a crime scene. You know,
Yeah.
you get their reaction. And there's a lot about mirrors as well. There's a lot of one-way mirrors, reflections of the cops
Yeah.
looking in on the suspects. There's a very telling moment where Jack stares at himself in the mirror
Yeah.
at the bar, and you can see him having a change of heart. He's going, I'm not going to take part in
Yeah.
this sleazy deal with Hudgens to set up the gay kids with the
Yeah.
DA. And he goes and tries to intervene, but it's too late.
Yeah.
I guess it's all about images and reflections
Yeah.
and surface images, framing. All of that just constantly is coming up throughout the film.
Yeah. So 2 thoughts on that. I think part of that goes back to just efficient storytelling. You
Mm.
know, that scene you're talking about when Bud kills the rapist and you see the cops coming in. Again, It's just efficient, beautiful storytelling. And also, I thought it was really, in every film noir, there is a narrator, and
Mm,
usually it's our anti-hero. It'd either be Bud or Ed or maybe even Jack, but instead it's the journalist.
mm,
It sets the stage. It lets you know, like, this is all about appearances. This is all about what the public thinks is going on. The scene in the beginning after the cop brawl, Ed/Guy Pearce's character is basically telling them what they should do, because
mm.
care about how this is gonna look. The police need to look good, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Well, this is what you should do, and this is how you should do it." And they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, and he would make a good image for the police." And you can just tell
Mm,
Dudley is just like the son of a bitch. He's really good at what he does. He's a politician. He's
yeah.
very good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why he's then telling Exley to lose the glasses because it
Yeah.
looks more heroic. But I think also it's that the press are actually setting the agenda.
Yeah.
That Hudgens, Danny DeVito's character, is literally saying, I've got this raid that you can do, you just work with me here, take your bribe to Jack. So there's this thing of like actually what the cops do, who they arrest is in part down to what the press tell them to do.
And I would say that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't this takes place, obviously this is fictional, plays place in the 50s, but I think that is something that's been happening and still happens today. They
Mm,
constantly have to think about how this is gonna look in the press, which maybe
mm.
they should.
But in this, I think instead of the press holding them to
Oh,
account,
no, yeah.
they are actually directing them. So it's like according to their own agenda,
Yes.
which is headlines.
Okay, so as we're moving towards the end here, we're talking about, like, 90s stuff, and what do you think aged well, and what do you think aged terribly?
So should we talk about what's aged well
Sure.
first? So in terms of aged well, I would say the lighting, the costumes, and the sets.
Yeah.
It is set in the 1950s, so it is a period piece at that point as well. But I just think hallelujah to a well lit film.
Yes.
So you can actually see things. And, in that final gunfight scene, there is probably a massive floodlight somewhere that's
Yeah.
maybe meant to be the moon or whatever.
Yeah.
You can see what's going on.
Yep.
You can see who's where and so on. It's not just like this murk.
Yeah.
And in so many modern films, with equivalent scenes, it's just pitch dark and you can't see what's going
Yeah.
on. And I think there's a lot of reasons behind that, partly due to digital filmmaking, which obviously they're shooting on actual film
Yeah.
with this. There's a bunch of different things going on, but with this, they use the lighting not just so that the poor viewer can actually see what the hell's going on, but also for dramatic effect. Like it just
Yeah.
makes it feel much more like this dramatic scene. The lighting is lighting up half their face, so there's like a dark side and a light side, and it
Yeah.
feels much more visually impactful that
Yeah.
way.
Well, and it's, again, it's a very film noir, but to your point, again, it looks lived in. I think with current lighting, because we use a lot of LED lighting now, and that's not just on sets, but even as far as in American, the lighting they use for street lamps is different than it used to be.
Mm,
So whereas this looks, again, we talk about this a lot, but this looks very lived in. Like, to me, this aged
mm,
well for the most part. This could have been made 5 years ago. Maybe some of the hair is very, like, 90s. Kim Basinger is like a 90s riff on a 50s hairstyle. But I thought, to your point, that the filming aged well. I thought the lighting aged well, much like we talked about in Scream. You could see everything.
yeah, and you can see the
You
sets
can
as
see the
well.
sets, and they're
That's You can
beautiful
see all the
sets.
details.
Yes, and the
Yes.
costumes. I thought most of it aged really well. What didn't
Mm,
age well for you, Chloe?
okay. Well, let us talk about Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, let's talk
So,
about it.
obviously, since this film came out decades later, there has been a lot of allegations against him of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And he was charged and taken to court over various charges relating to this, most notably Anthony Rapp. accused him of that. And he pled not guilty. And so far to date, he's been cleared of all charges.
Yes.
But there are more civil cases that
Yeah.
are due to be heard later this year. Um, Guy Pearce actually alleged that he'd been so-called, a quote, targeted on set by Kevin
Yeah.
Spacey. So it does relate to the making of this film. It's sort of interesting because watching it, I felt like actually Jack is, for much of the film, quite a sleazy, corrupt guy
Yeah.
until his moral awakening.
Yeah.
And so it felt a little bit in keeping with
Yeah.
with how we view Kevin Spacey now. So it didn't feel too jarring because I was sort of thinking, I'm not being asked to relate to this
Yeah.
guy, this character, when I know that the actor has this reputation around him. Obviously, we have to say that he denies everything.
Yes.
So there's that aspect. James Ellroy has expressed some very unpleasant views publicly, although there's always a sense that maybe he's being a bit of a provocateur. So
Yeah.
not quite sure to what extent he owns his quite his political and social views. Russell Crowe has mostly rehabilitated his image after he did a lot of brawling in the noughties. I was intrigued to see that one brawl in London was broken up by EastEnders Ross Kemp. That's very amusing if you're a Brit. But the worst thing probably on his rap sheet was he threw a telephone at a concierge in his hotel. And it seems like Russell Crowe was very ashamed of that. He pled guilty to the charges. I think there was a settlement. So he's kind of mostly moved on from there.
Yeah.
But basically, it's a film with some actors they've either been charged with and found guilty of doing bad things, or there are some very kind of unsavory allegations
Yeah.
around them. To sort of think about it further, I read this essay by Claire Dederer called "What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men?" It was published in 2017 in Paris Review, and she mentions Kevin Spacey, but she's mostly discussing loving the films of Woody Allen as a
Yeah.
teenager and really connecting with those films. And she's discussing Manhattan in large part, which is often seen as his greatest film. But he is playing, in many ways, a version of himself,
Mm-hmm.
and he's dating a high schooler. And he's kind of reveling in that. And so she kind of explores, she doesn't settle the issue of what do we do with the art of monstrous men, but she does kind of go how complicated and almost how poisoned her love for Woody Allen's films are
Yeah.
now that she knows all of the allegations against him and the fact that he married or Mia Farrow's adopted daughter,
Yeah.
who
His
he knew
stepdaughter.
as his stepdaughter when she was an adult, we should say.
Yeah.
Claire Dederer is talking about how icky these
Yeah.
films leave her feeling, and how there isn't really a particular way to settle this. You kind of have to take it on a case by case basis. But essentially, does art stand apart from its creators? A lot of people affirm, no, you can't separate the art from the
Yeah.
artist. And she's sort of saying it's a little bit more complicated than that,
Yeah.
and that there's a lot of the monstrous in artists in many cases anyway.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it doesn't take away your horror when you discover
Yeah.
what these artists have done in their, in real life.
Yeah. And on the Woody Allen thing, he's also had allegations from his adopted daughter
Mm,
of sexual assault as a child.
yes,
We
which
you and I,
we should say
which
he
he denies. He
denies. Yeah.
denies. Yes, yes. He has not been charged. There's a whole documentary about it. You can go look it up. But he does deny it. This is a complicated situation, when everything was going down with Weinstein, there was a film that he produced, and I know people that were in that film, and this was going to be like a break for them, or either way, they had. I don't know who can say what your break is going to be, but it was going to be good for them and their career, and it got buried because it was a Weinstein produced film. And I think there are
Mm,
other reasons. It was kind of toward there were other reasons, but it didn't help that it was like Weinstein. And there are other, like, when you're looking at some of this art, this does affect other people. Um,
mm.
And so when we're
Yeah.
looking at Kevin Spacey, that was actually my most 90s thing was the fact that Kevin Spacey's the star of the film, who actually, he was the most billable person. He's starring Kevin Spacey and Russell Crowe and
Mm.
Guy Pearce because he was the biggest name. And,
Yeah.
he's not the biggest role by any means, but he was the biggest
No.
name at the time. Would anybody believe us that what was it 15 years after this was made, maybe 20 years after this was made, he would get replaced as the lead of a film, All the Money
A
in the
Ridley
World?
Scott film. Yeah.
Yeah, he was
Yeah. And they
replaced,
reshot all of his scenes.
reshot all of his scenes because of these allegations. So yeah, I think for me that's like the most 90s thing and because we know what we know now,
Mm.
that scene with him and Danny DeVito and Simon Baker. And so this is the scene where Danny DeVito's as the journalist is trying to get him to Simon Baker to like hit on the DA because he wants like dirt on him. And the way Kevin Spacey, he wasn't being like, no, mate, you shouldn't do this. His character is an accessory to this other character getting victimized.
Mm.
So it kind of watching that scene, I was a little like, ooh, this is
But
making
then
me
the
uncomfortable.
film,
Yeah,
that's his moral awakening. He has
absolutely.
second thoughts, but then the film very much almost punishes him because the young gay actor is
Brutally,
murdered.
yeah.
I mean, I think there's something to be said also about how women, gay people, and Black and Mexican characters are treated in this film. And
Yeah,
how, again, that's the other thing that I think it is different from how we would treat it now,
yeah,
because I think there have been way more conversations since about how we're representing the other, the marginalized
yeah,
people on screen. And so I want to be clear, like, I'm not being reactionary about this. I fully accept that the film is, to some degree, constituting a commentary on how the police treat
yes.
Black people,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mexican people, and how the society basically puts women into
Yeah,
various boxes. But I don't feel like it does enough. And it's really hard for me to articulate this. You take the women, for example, they are quite isolated. I mean, I
yeah.
don't think this film passes the Bechdel test, which is obviously a
Yes,
bit of a
it
joke, but
yeah, yeah.
it is I don't think that there are two women that speak to each other in this.
No.
They are either whores or they are secretaries.
Or they're a mother
There's a mother, there
mourning
is a
her
mother as
whore
well.
daughter.
Yes. But she's almost slightly foolish,
Yes.
like I don't know if the film really kind of fully humanizes her. Like
Yeah,
she doesn't realize there's a dead body under her house.
yeah,
And actually she's a very distressed mother. It's awful.
yeah,
But yeah, you don't really see the secretaries are mostly silent and just
yeah,
sort of directed here, there, wherever. They're basically sort of human filing machines. I, Lynn, there's obviously something to her. She's got, she spars with Bud and Exley, and, she's got dreams of going back to Arizona, but she's also a stooge for Patchett,
yep,
rather than a more kind of self-serving femme fatale. And she's definitely self-assured and she's capable. When we first meet her, like she can spot from 100 yards that Bud is a cop. But when you think about the very kind of forthright women in films from the 30s and 40s, those film noir films,
yeah.
like, I
They
don't
don't
think the female characters really hold a candle to them.
no.
Like Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, Lauren Bacall, they are really very self-possessed and
Mhm.
really they answer back
Yeah,
or they set the agenda. So to me, it feels as if by the 90s and to some degree now, everything is slipped from how we were portraying women to some degree.
yeah.
Obviously, it's more complicated than that.
It was more it sadly is maybe more progressive in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 70s. Because to your point, on that poster that is, like, seared into my brain, Kim Basinger has a very, femme fatale look, but she isn't a femme fatale at all in this film. you
Well,
know?
she's used to set up Exley and Bud,
Is,
isn't
but
she?
not
So she
really.
is to that
How to your
degree.
point, how much power does she really have?
Yeah, and that's the thing. She's not self-directed in that. She wasn't behind it all along, kind of thing.
She's a
Um,
pawn in the plot.
she's a pawn, and that's the thing. I think that's what I come down to is that I feel like returning to the black characters, I kind of briefly touched on it. All of them are victims of violence, and all of them are being directed around by the white cops, and it's obviously, again, it's a commentary on that setup, that world. But I feel as if there is a way to center characters who are victims in which you get more sense of their inner
Yeah.
life. They're not totally dehumanized in this, but there are no black characters really, apart from maybe one who aren't monstrous criminals to some
Yeah.
degree. And, the Mexican girl who's raped, I mean, she does comment on it. She says she went along with the idea that these guys took part in the Night Owl massacre and sort of gave that false testimony because she says, would anyone care they raped a Mexican girl from Boyle Heights if they hadn't killed those white people at the Night Owl? So the film definitely is commenting on the
Yeah.
racism. It's just that I feel like nowadays we might be conscious enough to center characters like the Mexican girl to get. I mean, you barely see her apart
Yeah.
from when she's strapped naked on a bed.
Which is horrific. That whole scene is horrific. I was like,
It's a
"Holy
horrific,
shit."
horrible scene, and you would have more sense of where those black characters are coming from and what's led them to where they are. I'm not saying there's none in the script, but it just feels like everyone's kind of pushed to one side. And
Yeah.
yes, those white cops are anti-heroes, but they do get to have heroic moments, which none of the others
Yeah.
get to have. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
I think what I'm hearing you say is, and or at least what I'm thinking as I hear what you say is, if this was made today, you'd still have those corrupt cops, but then you might also develop those other characters more, whether
Yeah.
that be the three black men that were accused or the woman, rather than just being killed. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I do hear what you're saying. I think, looking back on this now with the 2026 lens, it's all just a bunch of white dudes battling it out. And I'm
Yeah. And
tired of watching a bunch of white dudes battling it out,
I think the thing is, yeah, it's really difficult to say because those white guys are not being treated as straightforward heroes
No,
by any
no.
means, and I don't. I guess to me it just feels like there's not enough of other characters to kind of give another perspective.
Yeah,
And I think you've got this theme of domestic violence, and Bud, you can tell when he assaults Lynn, he
yeah,
can't he's never going to forgive himself. He's
yeah,
horrified by what he's done, but like he runs away. And then she forgives him,
yeah.
and she blames herself to some
Yes.
degree.
But that's
And
what
so,
domestic victims do. Domestic violence
yeah,
victims do.
and then she takes him back, and they ride off into the sunset together. And I just think,
Like a Western.
as a viewer now, I just sort of think you could complicate that a little bit more to get to the point where they're together, because actually there's more iterations to go through before she could trust him
Yeah,
again if she ever
exactly.
could.
But
So yeah, it's
okay,
complicated.
it's complicated. And that is why we're watching these films, because they are complicated. So what awards would you give this film, Chloe?
I would probably give best cinematography. So that goes to Dante Spinotti, who also shot Michael Mann's Heat.
Mhm.
As I've said before, it's dramatic. You can see what's actually going on in each scene. Much of it is set at nighttime, but it's visually
Yeah.
intelligible. And apparently Curtis Hanson and Dante Spinotti also looked a lot at Robert Frank's photo book, The Americans, as a kind of key visual influence. And I sort of looked at a few of those photos, and they're interesting because they are often taking an unexpected viewpoint on things,
Mhm.
like in terms of the angle, in terms of who gets featured in the frame, which, as I say, I'm not 100% sure this film carries through,
Yeah.
but I do think it's interesting they really went to look at photos from the period.
Yeah.
Best set is Lynn's apartment.
Oh,
It's
yes.
beautiful Spanish-style Art Deco influenced interior. It's in rather kind of muted shades, but it's got these really kind of sumptuous draped fabrics, curvaceous detailing. There's this centerpiece bed that she uses for her clients.
Yeah. Which is much different than the bed she uses, which I
Yes, it's
love. I love that
contrasted with
detail.
that. Yeah. She's got this really homely, small bedroom that she brings Bud into, and there's like an embroidered cushion that sort of signals that she's from Arizona. But she's part of that sumptuous set downstairs where she's wearing this beautiful high necked dress in silk, and she's part of the image, and it
Yeah.
is visually stunning. And then my funniest moment is when Exley claims that a woman having drinks with one of the suspects is a sex worker cut to look like Lana Turner. And then the reveal is she is Lana
Yeah.
Turner. And
Yeah.
Jack just lets him lets him
Yeah.
walk into that
Yeah.
one, and it's very funny.
That was mine as well. My favorite line, my favorite scene, because literally laughed out loud. For me, my awards, I'm gonna give the Khaki Menace to Russell Crowe. I love how Bud reminds me of like a shop teacher from high
Yeah.
school, but he's gonna kick your ass. So he's the Khaki Menace. Best command of an American accent goes to Guy Pearce. Worst command of an American accent goes to Russell Crowe. Kept going in and out of that accent.
Ah,
I was like, what is that? What is that? It was like sometimes it was like Australian, sometimes it was like even Irish, sometimes it was like
yeah.
I could hear some British in there.
Is James Cromwell meant to be Irish?
So
Because
this is
he
my
wanders in
thing.
out of Irish and
Yes.
American.
So I was about to say worst command of American accent, James Cromwell, but he is American. But there were a
Mm.
few times that he went Irish. I'm like, is he supposed to be Irish? Does he
Well, I
have
think
Irish
he is meant to be Irish or like from an Irish background
family?
in it.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
it
mm,
wasn't clear. Okay, so as we round this out, Chloe, is this a film from the 90s worth returning to? Does it hold up for you?
as a film, I think, the production values and the cast are excellent, and this labyrinthine plot really comes across. For me, I just don't love it like I used to.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
shocked to hear that.
I know.
Listener, let me tell you, Chloe, I've heard so much about LA Confidential. I thought when I told her I hadn't watched it, she was gonna be like, "Oh my God, what?" So I'm
Yeah.
shocked to hear that.
I think it's partly because I've watched plenty more period pieces set in the criminal underworld and police procedurals ever since. So it had this impact on me as a teen because I
Yeah.
hadn't seen much in that
Yeah.
genre before. But I guess I felt disappointed at its treatment of women, the fact that the racial minority characters are scapegoated. It's not, again, I recognize it's commentary, but I feel like they have very little to do to escape their boxes in the
Yeah.
way that, say, Bud White and Exley have more opportunities to redeem themselves. So I felt like it wasn't working on a character level as well as it could be, and that it was kind of a bit of a time capsule in that case.
Yeah.
It's a very hyper masculine view of the world. As I say, I feel like there's something about it that is slightly reveling in the violence
Yeah.
because ultimately they look so cool with their guns, but it's just so handsomely done. So I think
Yes.
it's worth a watch.
Yeah.
It is a great film, but with a lot of asterisks. You watch it and you remember that this is a film from 30 years ago. I think we would make this film differently nowadays. We'd
Yeah,
have a different
totally.
focus.
Totally. I feel the same way. I'm so glad we chose this. I'm so glad I watched it. Will I return to it? Probably not. I rented it. I don't think I need to return to it, but I think if you're a film student, I think it's a really good film to watch for some of the aspects that we talked about. The cinematography is really great. I think it's a nice time capsule. But yeah, if we were making this again, if this were to be remade, I think it would be a different film in a lot of ways.
Uh,
But if you haven't seen it, go for it. I'm glad I watched it, but I'm not going to watch it again. Okay. if you watch this and you're like, "Oh, I want something more updated," or "I kinda wanna stay in this genre," or what would you recommend to people, Chloe?
I've got a few.
Okay.
Zodiac from 2007, David Fincher. And it's got similarities to this because it's this kind of maze-like period police procedural. It's this time it's based on the real case of the Zodiac killer in the
Mhm.
70s. He killed a series of people in the San Francisco area. And it's beautifully composed. It's very patient. It's very dark. Obviously, it's famously an unsolved case, so it has this rather murky aspect to it. There's going to be compromises to this, but there's also a few different main characters that you're following, and they weave in and out of each other's storylines. So I think that is probably, to me, a better film ultimately than LA Confidential. Then a film that I think is absolutely incredible and we are going to do at some point is Heat, directed
Yeah.
by Michael Mann, 1995. Obviously shares the same cinematographer as this film. And this is a cop versus criminal cat and mouse drama. And it's got one of the greatest and most influential action sequences of all time. It's incredible.
Yeah, so
I'm
good.
looking forward to watching that again and seeing if it holds up. I think it does.
I watched it within 5 years, and it does.
Yeah. And Killing Them Softly from 2012, directed by Andrew Dominic. This is a crime drama and it's absolutely pitch black in tone. And I believe it's set in around sort of 2008, the economic crash.
Mhm.
Brad Pitt stars. There's a late performance from James Gandolfini. It's incredibly cynical about the politics surrounding the American dream. And I think that's an
Uh.
interesting film because there's barely any female characters in it. But I was left feeling, and I need to revisit it to see what I think now, but I was left thinking that's a film that is trying to make a statement about masculinity. Women are not in there because this is the absolute hell that
Yeah.
these hyper masculine criminals have brought themselves into. And then lastly, Training Day from 2001,
Ooh, that's
directed
a
by
good one. That's a good pull.
yeah, directed by Antoine Fuqua. Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke star in it, and it's set over one day. It's following these LAPD narcotics officers. That's why I thought about this for this film. And Hawke's character kind of undergoes a similar baptism of fire as Exley in this, because he's paired with Denzel Washington's character, who is a corrupt cop. So again, a more modern version of that story. Have to say, at the end of this, I'm not sure I want to go to LA.
Right? So for me, I got 3 quick ones. It may be an obvious one, but if you haven't seen it, Chinatown. Also set in LA, it's a neo-noir, Jack Nicholson, Faye Dunaway, John Huston. It is talking about complicated artists. It's directed by Roman Polanski. Don't hold it against it. But yeah, it takes place during loosely based on the water wars in LA. And yeah, it's just a really solid film noir from the 70s. I think, Faye Dunaway is more at the center of that story, whereas like Kim Basinger isn't in this
Mm.
one. She's much more of an active player. So if you're a cinephile or you just love film, you want to go down that neo noir, you got to see Chinatown if you haven't. And then if you're wanting some more Guy Pearce, but would really kind of put him solely on the map, dealing with complicated protagonists. Are they good? Are they not? Is Memento from 2000. This is Christopher Nolan's really breakout piece. And if you're not familiar, Pierce plays a man with no short-term memory hunting his wife's killer. It's told in reverse chronology. So that's what made it at the time, this was very like, what is happening? Now we're kind of used to that, but in 2000, it was very groundbreaking. But again, dealing with a protagonist that may not be a good guy. And then finally, I love murder mystery shows and films. And the latest Knives Out, Wake Up Dead Man, I thought was probably the maybe my favorite in the series. I thought Josh O'Connor was amazing. And if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. I really recommend seeing that. Glenn Close should have been nominated for supporting actress on that film. It's really good performances, and I think it just was kind of not done well by Netflix's press. And of course, there's Daniel Craig, who's always fun on those. Go see it. It's actually really good. That is it for us on Total 90s Recall. We hope you've enjoyed it. Are you going to go watch LA Confidential, or have you watched it recently? And if you have, tell us what you think. We want to hear it. You can email us at total90srecall@gmail.com. You can visit us on Instagram, Total 90s Recall. That's Total 90s Recall. You can find us on Letterboxd now. We've actually set up our Letterboxd. Go over there, follow us. We'll follow you back. And if you're liking this, please like and subscribe. Get us 5-star ratings. That really helps our visibility, especially on Apple Podcasts and discoverability. And the next time, you're thinking about framing an innocent person, tell them about Total 90s Recall. We really appreciate it. I'm Molly.
And I'm Chloe.
And we'll see you at the movies.